In case my channel branding didn't make it obvious, I love adventure games. You know what I also love? Mystery stories. So naturally, mystery adventure games are one of my favorite genres. Some of my favorite games like Hotel Dusk and Ghost Trick both fall into this genre, and one of its most influential forerunners is the Famicom Detective Club trilogy. It, alongside the Portopia serial murder case and the Jinguji Saburo, or Jake Hunter in the West, series, set the standard for Japanese adventure games going forward. Out of the three, the FTC games were always my favorites due to how their mysteries tie into the idea of urban legends. Those of you who follow my community posts might remember that I actually wrote this video, some year ago, when I first played through the series, but never finished it because I lost interest. Not because I didn't like the games or anything, but because I just had other things I would want to work on instead. However, an all-new FTC game titled Emio happens to be right around the corner, which, much like the originals, was produced, designed, and with a scenario by Yoshio Sakamoto. For those of you who don't know who that is, he's the guy who made Metroid and every WarioWare game until Game & Wario. So I thought, hey, might as well go back to this video idea after all. For the sake of this video, I'll be talking explicitly about the Switch remakes of the first two games. This has two reasons. The first and simpler one is that the new game, Emio, will be made in the same style and by the same team as the remakes. The second is that, frankly, the release history of the series is a giant pain in the ass. The original Famicom releases of both games were split into 2 volumes each, then eventually being re-released on GBA under the Famicom Classics line. But then the second game also had a separate remake on SNES 9 years after the original release, even though the N64 was already out by several years by then. First game didn't get anything though, so ultimately it's just more consistent to talk about the remakes for both. With that said, let's just get into it. At its core, Famicom Detective Club, The Missing Heir, is a murder mystery. The protagonist is an unnamed teenager who fell from a cliff known to be a popular suicide spot and got amnesia because of it. On my playthrough I ended up naming him Takashi Kagetani after the main character of Glass Rose. So, for the sake of not constantly calling him the protagonist, I'll just call him Takashi. Turns out he's actually the assistant of a detective named Utsugi who's currently away on a business leave, leaving Takashi in charge of the agency. His partner is Ayumi, a high school girl who works there as a part-timer. Turns out Takashi had been hired by the butler of the wealthy Ayashiro family to investigate the mysterious death of the family head, which he believes to have been a murder. Each of the family members is a possible suspect as they're all after the inheritance, and as you'd expect, one death leads to many, and now it's your job to figure out who the killer is, as well as their motive. It's hardly an original setup, being very reminiscent of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, also known as I was advised not to use the original title, but that's hardly a bad thing. Lots of mysteries are blatantly inspired by it, and its setup leaves a lot of room for reinterpretation. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, where FTC differentiates itself is in how it ties the idea of urban legends into its narratives. In this game, the local myth is that should the family head die, they will kill anybody who tries to unjustly claim the Ayashiro family treasure. Despite not being all that grand, the way the story ties itself into the overarching narrative is pretty clever and interestingly deals with the idea of how urban legends come to be in the first place. That's pretty much it for the story setup, so let's talk about actually playing it. Since FTC is one of the earliest examples of a Japanese adventure game, it's relatively simple. Most of it takes place in menus with options available to you depending on the situation. Out of all of them, Look/Examine is easily the one you'll be using the most, as it gives you a cursor with which you can inspect pretty much anything on screen. That's basically it. In this way you collect clues and investigate the crime scenes until you can eventually solve the case. They actually use these commands in pretty creative ways, though it can often devolve into exhausting every single command without thought until a new one appears that lets you progress. The writing, at least in this game, is just alright. Characters aren't all that interesting, truth be told, and the actual narrative, while solid, ultimately fails to leave much of an impact because the pacing can be pretty bad sometimes. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for slow burns, but in the first 2 chapters of this game basically nothing happens, and it can get pretty tiring. Personally, I also found the underlying mystery relatively lacking, and the twists towards the end both pretty predictable and unsatisfying. Visually speaking, the remake also has some issues. While the originals went for a cartoony and simple look to circumvent the hardware's limitations, the remake goes for a similarly cartoony look, but then adds these significantly more detailed CGs for the murders, which results in this very uncanny contrast between the two. This was probably intentional on some level, but I can't help but wish they had gone for this more detailed style for the entire game. What makes it especially jarring is how the game comes across as pretty lighthearted a lot of the time, in part because of its soundtrack. There's not that many songs in the game, and the main investigation theme feels way too upbeat for what's actually going on. Overall, I don't think FTC 1 is a bad game by any means, but both as an adventure game and as a mystery story, it's just not that interesting. Alright at best. If you're gonna get both in a pack anyway, then it's not like you're wasting your time by playing it, but you wouldn't be missing out on much if you just skip it instead, since it feels like a proof of concept more than anything. There's not many games I would label a perfect sequel, something that takes every single one of its predecessor's best aspects, dials them up to 11, and irons out everything that didn't work. And yet Famicom Detective Club 2, The Girl Who Stands Behind, is exactly that. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty much identical to the first, not really much you can change there. And yet, just about everything else has seen significant improvements across the board. Not only is it much more cinematic, but the visuals have been adjusted in order to bring the CGs and sprites closer to each other. The music fits the tone of the game way better and there's a lot more of it. The characters are significantly more interesting, the pacing is very well done, and the overarching narrative and mystery are great. On that note, let's talk about that narrative for a moment. The game takes place 2 years before the events of The Missing Heir and opens with Takashi and Utsugi investigating a crime scene. The victim, a high schooler by the name of Yoko Kojima, whose corpse was found on a riverbed. Cause of death, asphyxiation through strangulation. Since Takashi is of high school age, Utsugi makes him go out to the high school to mingle with the students in order to gather information on Yoko. Turns out she was part of her school's detective club and in the middle of investigating a local rumor, The Girl Who Stands Behind. The rumor says that sometimes when walking around the school's hallway, you will see a girl in a school uniform covered in blood standing behind you. This is as much as I'm willing to say about the plot, as I find it to be genuinely really well written. The overarching mystery is extremely clever, and your progression through the case feels natural without ever falling into any of the same pitfalls as the predecessor. It also tackles significantly darker subject matter, and does it pretty well if you ask me. What helps is that the writing too has seen a major upgrade. The balance between seriousness and humor has been refined by a lot, and while some lines can still feel a bit forced or jarring, it never fails to quickly get back on its track. It's genuinely impressive how much Sakamoto and his team improved at writing a compelling mystery within a single game. Now, I did say that the gameplay is identical, but there is actually one major addition that takes place entirely behind the scenes. So, if you don't want to be spoiled on a minor but really cool surprise, skip to the timestamp on screen. The game actively keeps track of your relationship with Ayumi and how you progress throughout the investigation. Minor things like what kind of objects you're prone to investigating first, or if you at any point just mindlessly mashed through the options, are all things that factor into this assessment, and while it has absolutely no bearing on the main plot, it's an extremely cool little bonus that helps make your playthrough feel just a tiny bit more unique. At about 5 to 8 hours of playtime, it's a very leisurely experience that I cannot recommend enough. It might not be close to the level of something like, say, Hotel Dusk, but it is a fantastic time nonetheless. But you know what's not fantastic? The prices on these remakes. Charging $60 for what are essentially two one-to-one remakes of NES games is a completely deranged thing for Nintendo to be doing, and part of why they didn't sell that well in the first place. But if you can find them for $40 or less, then absolutely go for it. Otherwise, I suggest waiting for a sale or something, because they're just not big enough to warrant the price. At the start of the video, I mentioned that FDC was a trilogy, and that MEO was a new game. So what's this mysterious third game that never got a remake? I present to you BS Tante Club, Yuki Nikie Tante Kako, or BS Detective Club, The Past That Disappeared in the Snow. The reason you've probably never heard of it is that this was a Satellaview game. I'm not here to give you a history lesson on what that is, but the short of it is that this was an old service for the SNES that let you download games digitally that were able to be enhanced through radio. But you could only play them on a schedule. This game in particular was released in 3 parts, all of them having their ROMs archived and being fully playable with emulation. Well, I say fully, but that's not quite right. Remember how I said these games were often enhanced through the radio? Well, in BSDC's case, most of those enhancements came in the form of pretty much the entire game's audio, including all of the soundtrack and full voice acting, and that's just not something an emulator can do. All that stuff is not entirely lost to time, mind you, as archives of full complete playthroughs do exist online, the footage on screen right now being one of them. But obviously, they take away the actual playable aspect of the game. Usually this would be a big deal, but the gameplay is significantly dumbed down in the first place. See, in order to sync up the music and voice acting for every scene, the game runs on a timer adjusted to the real world time. This means that after a certain amount of time has passed, the game automatically proceeds to the next scene. And yes, this means exactly what you'd think it would. You can beat the entire game by doing absolutely nothing at all. Now, this will have you actively missing out on major parts of the story, as a lot of the free investigation segments contain major clues, with you being rated at the end of each of the 3 parts based on how many clues you collected, but you'll still get the gist of it by just not doing anything. The sprite work is great and pretty damn detailed, which actually makes finding all the important clues pretty easy, but of course there's a catch here too. Each of the 3 parts is exactly 1 hour long, so keeping up as a non-native speaker can be seriously stressful sometimes because of how quickly the scenes go by. With that said, is the actual plot any good? Again, let's start with the setup. The game takes place 1 year after the second game, but still before Missing Heir, and focuses entirely on Ayumi. Takashi is nowhere to be found this time. Ayumi goes visiting her mother up in a snowy village in the mountains, only for the mayor mayor of the village to be found murdered, with Ayumi's mother being the prime suspect. Since she is a part-timer for a detective, at this point she ends up investigating the case herself, and the plot gets going from here. I really can't say any more about it because of the breakneck pace of the game. There's really not much you can do with an adventure game in just 3 hours while putting your players on such a tight leash. I mean, hell, I can't even really get into the urban legend of this game because that'd already be spoiling half the plot. This is kind of the game's biggest issue and fucks over the entire thing really. Dialogue goes by way too quickly, characters don't get any breathing room to be fleshed out properly, and their narrative unravels like a ball of yarn. The final 30 minutes of the game went by so quickly, I genuinely had a hard time keeping up. It's a damn shame too, because I do think that the story is fundamentally pretty solid. I would definitely consider it better than the first game, but unfortunately because of its very unique nature, it falls flat on its face and is dragged down a lot. I really wish Mages had remade it alongside the first 2 games, just for the sake of completion if nothing else, and taking the opportunity to actually expand on it. But from the start they did say they'd rather get Sakamoto and make an all new game, and that's exactly what ended up happening with Emio. So ultimately it leaves BS Detective Club figuratively in the snow, an experimental game that, while solid, I can only recommend backhandedly. And as of right now, this marks the end of the Famicom Detective Club series, leaving us with 2 alright games and 1 really good one. I'm personally really excited for Emio, and will probably be making a video on it once it drops and I've had the chance to play through it. I really hope it does well, because I would love to see the series continue and lean even more into all of the aspects that made the girl who stand behind work as well as they did. So, if you have even a slight interest in any of this stuff, I highly recommend giving this little series a chance. With that said, I wish you all a wonderful morning, day, evening or night. I'm gonna go fondle a corpse. Cheers!